يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة.
When we look at this book that we are studying, and we're just going over the name right now, Lum'ah, what does Lum'ah mean? It is to make something shine or radiate, to make something bright, to enlighten something. And it also has the meaning al-bulghat min al-ish, yani to be sufficient in something. So there is a double meaning, and both are a beautiful meaning. One is to make radiant or clear or enlighten somebody about al-i'tiqad, about the belief, the aqidah, the creed of the Ahl Sunnah. So lum'at al-i'tiqad. Now for those of you, inshallah, who are good in nahu, you will notice it should be lum'atu al-i'tiqad di. Why? Mudaf ilayh. Lum'ah, to make radiant or clear or to have sufficiency in al-i'tiqad, in the belief of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Wal-hadi ila sabil al-rishad. And al-hadi, for the guide towards the sabil, ila sabil, towards the path of al-rashad, yani towards the righteousness or the guidance. So we see a beautiful title for this book. Now, who wrote the book? It's very important. When we study a book, we know the author, and we know the author well. You don't want to just skim through books. You want to be from those dedicated to knowledge, who understand who we take our knowledge from and why we take our knowledge from those scholars. The Shaykh who wrote Lum'atul I'tiqad, his name is the Shaykh al-Islam, as a laqab, as a title, Al-Hafiz, Al-Imam, Al-Zahid, Al-Mujahid, Muwaffaq al-Din, Abu Muhammad, Abdullah bin Ahmad bin Muhammad ibn Qudama, ibn Miqdam, ibn Nasr, ibn Abdullah, ibn Hudayfa, ibn Muhammad, ibn Yaqub, ibn Qasim, ibn Ibrahim, ibn Ismail, ibn Yahya, ibn Muhammad, ibn Salim, ibn al-Sahabi al-Jalil, Abdullah, ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar bin Khattab, radiyallahu anhuma. Subhanallah, that's his full name and lineage. All the way back to who? Umar bin Khattab, radiyallahu anhu. What is the first thing you notice? That Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama, he is from the lineage of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu. Through his son, the famous Sahabi, Abdullah bin Umar, the great scholar, through his son, As-Salim. So you see, he comes from a very pious lineage. He comes from the lineage of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu. Now, we call him Shaykh al-Islam. And Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd, as I've depended a lot on the biography written by him to explain about Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama. He calls him Shaykh al-Islam, and he writes that in the earlier books, when it would just say Shaykh al-Islam, the ulama would understand it to mean Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama. And in the later books, when we see Shaykh al-Islam, usually it refers to Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullah alayhuma. So we see him being called Shaykh al-Islam. Now why? Is it just a title to throw around? Like nowadays, people throw around titles any way they like. Imam Jarh al-Ta'dil, al-Shaykh al-Hakim al-Amma, just like whatever you want to throw a title, you just throw it. But the titles in the past had meanings. They had certain criteria you had to meet to get that title, for the ulama to give you that title. And why Shaykh al-Islam? Sometimes an alim can be called a Shaykh al-Baghdad, or Shaykh al-Sham, or Shaykh al-Madina, or Shaykh al-Hanabila, or Shaykh al-Ahnaf, or Shaykh al-Malikiyah, or Shaykh al-Zaman, or whatever, all these different titles. But when they got Shaykh al-Islam, it meant that they were not just doing a service for a madhab, or a community, or an area, but for all of the Muslim ummah in all of the different fields. There are many fields. Some people, they're only concerned about the field of da'wah. They think that's all of Islam is da'wah. No. That's a juz. That's a part of Islam. Some people think ilm is all of Islam. Some people think dhikr is all of Islam. Some people think al-jihad fi sabilillah is all of Islam. All of these are ajza. They are parts of Islam. But Islam is a complete religion, a total way of life. So an alim that served the ummah in only tafsir, then you would call him a shaykh al-tafsir, or a muhaddith, somebody who did effort on hadith, or a faqih, somebody who only did fiqh. But when you have somebody who served the ummah in every aspect of the need of this ummah, then he is called a shaykh al-Islam. Then he's called al-hafiz. What does that mean? Today we say this brother is hafiz, and we mean by it that he's memorized the Quran. And even though Al-Muwaffaquddin ibn Qudama did memorize the entire Quran at a very young age, but that's not what al-hafiz means in the technical books of terminology. In the books of Mustalah al-Hadith, in the books where Ilm al-Rijal was discussed, al-hafiz would mean somebody who's memorized a lot of hadith. Some of the ulama, they said 50,000, some said 100,000, some gave different numbers, but the key aspect is for those ulama that were dedicated to memorizing hadith, those were the ones that were called huffaz. And why? As Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, somebody will discuss a little bit today, explains, he said because those ulama that protected and memorized a hadith, protected all of the ulum. The ones who memorized Quran were called Qurra. They were the reciters of the Quran. They used to recite the Quran. But those who memorized hadith preserved tafsir. Because how will you understand the Quran? Through the hadith. They preserved fiqh. Because where do you derive fiqh from? From hadith. They preserved a tarikh. Because how do we know the seerah? How do we know what happened with the Sahaba? Through hadith. They preserved even lugha. Because even in language, many times we go back to the ahadith to find the ruling. So that's why they were called huffaz. He's also called al-imam. What does it mean, al-imam? Imam doesn't mean he just led salah. Today we think if you're assigned to lead salah 5 times a day somewhere, this is an imam. No. An imam meant he was a leader of the Muslim community. He led the community in all their needs, in all their hardships. In when they had a problem, the people would go to him to make decisions, and they would accept his decisions. And he would be a leader in inviting towards good and forbidding evil. And that's why they call him al-imam. And they call him al-zahid. He was a man of zuhud. He loved the akhirah. And he had no love for the dunya. He is also called al-mujahid. Why? Because he fought jihad fi sabilillah with his hand in qital. Not just with lisan, but with a hand against the crusaders. As did many from his family. When the crusaders attacked, these ulama, they didn't just sit around giving fatwa and kind of giving the thumbs up, as we would say today, but he actually physically went and got the Muslims together and stood to defend the lands of Islam. Muwaffaquddin is his title. That's actually not his name. And the way of the adat of the Muslims of that time was that you would have a name, and then you would have a kunya. You would have a nickname, like Abu something. And then you would have a laqab, a title that they would give you as a child. And the title of this scholar who wrote this book is Muwaffaquddin. His kunya, his nickname is Abu Muhammad, when his actual name is Abdullah. And he is known as Ibn Qudama, even though Ibn Qudama is a family. And there are other ulama with the same name, but he is the most famous of them. Like Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah is a family. And there are many famous ulama from the family of Ibn Qudama. There are many famous ulama from the family of Ibn Taymiyyah. But there are some of them that became so famous that today when we say Ibn Taymiyyah, everybody assumes we're talking about Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Abul Abbas ibn Taymiyyah, the famous Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Even though his grandfather, Majduddin Abdul Salam ibn Taymiyyah, was also an amazing scholar, a great scholar, somebody who did a lot of effort for the religion, wrote very beneficial books. His father, Abdul Halim Shihabuddin ibn Taymiyyah. And these names should be known to you as students of knowledge, as you know your own children's and your parents' names. These names should come automatically to you. Because one of the sad things that I see today is students of knowledge, they know sports stars. If I name some basketball players or football players, and I'm not going to because I'll date myself, realizing I haven't watched sports for a long time. But if I did, you guys would know them. In some countries, soccer players. In some countries, cricket players. May Allah forgive us. For some of us, even the fusaq and fujjab that are movie actors, we know their names, and we know their histories, and we know what movies they made, and we know how many hits they made in a certain game, and how many yards they ran. You know, all this waste of time of fantasy football and wasting our time with these kinds of things, looking at stats. But if I ask you who was Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi and what he wrote, and if you don't know that, then I'm ashamed to say I can't really consider you a student of knowledge. Until you know the ulama and you know their books and you know what they wrote and you're dedicated to that. Those are tullab al-ilm. Ibn Qudama, he became famous Ibn Qudama. Even though, as I said, there are other ulama by that name. But he became famous Ibn Qudama. He is al-Maqdisi. Al-Maqdisi means, even though his lineage goes back to Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, with Qurayshi, from Mecca, but their family settled in Al-Quds. Al-Quds, the blessed place, may Allah free it from the Ikhwan al-Qirb wal-Khinzir, from the Yahud. Yes, I'm still not scared to say that. So, may Allah free Al-Quds from the Yahud and bring it back to the Muslimin. He is from this blessed land, a land that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed. And he is also known as Al-Hanbali, because in fiqh, he was from the greatest of the ulama of the Hanabila. He is from the two shaykhan, the greatest ulama, the two great shaykhs of the Hanabila, one being him and the other being who? Excellent, mashallah. At least one of my old students is on point here. Al-Majduddin ibn Taymiyyah, the grandfather of Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah. These are the two shaykhs of the Hanabila. Muwaffaquddin ibn Taymiyyah. And he is from the greatest of the ulama who were the people of ijtihad within the madhab. He made a lot of ijtihad even within the madhab. He wasn't what you would call a muqallid. He didn't just make a blind taqleed. He looked at the dalail, and many times he would give rulings in his books against whatever was the mu'tamid of the madhab before him. And many of the ulama after his time, they would go to his books to know the standard of the madhab, because of his ability, his ijtihad, his knowledge. I want to speak a little bit about his life, very briefly, and I want to also speak a little bit about the books he wrote. And inshallah, as a homework, all of the brothers here and the sisters here should get to know this alim. You should know him well, inshallah, by the next class. Muwaffaquddin ibn Qudama, he wrote in almost every field of Islamic knowledge. He was not somebody who's only good in a few subjects. Some of the ulama, may Allah reward them, they are only known for Nahu. They are good in Nahu. Like As-Sibawayh, he's a famous scholar of Nahu. But can anybody name me a book he wrote in fiqh, or in hadith, ilm al-rijal, al-aqidah? No. And you will find some ulama, they're excellent in tafsir, but you will not find them writing in aqidah. And some ulama famous for aqidah and writing in aqidah and preserving it, but they will not have much in hadith. But Ibn Qudama is one of the rare ulama that wrote and was proficient in all of these ulum. He didn't just write in these ulum, but he was excellent in them. The first thing let's talk about is al-fiqh. From the books he wrote is Al-Umdatul Fiqh. And it's a beautiful series of books he wrote. Umdatul Fiqh, meaning the best or the top of al-fiqh. And he wrote this as a beginner's book, a matan. And he wrote it very concise. And even though it's a matan, he filled it with dalail. He put proofs in it. You will find a hadith in it. And he will try to begin every bab with a sahih hadith. And this is the book that we were studying here in this masjid as well, Umdatul Fiqh of Ibn Qudama. And for the one who graduates from this beginning book, that only gives one opinion, he doesn't get into khilaf, and only gives a few dalail, and only gives what is standard and acceptable according to Ibn Qudama, then he has the next book which he wrote himself to graduate the student to the next level. And that is Al-Muqni'. Al-Muqni' is a book which is a little bit bigger now, where now he gets into the khilaf within the Hanabila. He gets into the difference of opinion within the Hanbali madhab. Then when you graduate from that, he has the third level book, Al-Kafi. Al-Kafi, he gets into a lot of khilaf, but he still stays within the Hanabila, but he discusses a lot of dalail, a lot of proofs, and a lot of tarjih, and why something is rajih, and what is stronger, and why, and which is weaker, and he discusses a lot of detail that the beginning student would not be able to handle. And then he writes his final book in this series, and it's called Al-Mughni. When Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baz, rahmatullah alayh, Al-Mufti, Al-Alim, Al-Lama, Shaykh ibn Baz, when he was asked which book is the greatest book of fiqh ever written, and you can find this fatwa, Al-Majmu' Al-Fatawa ibn Baz, rahmatullah alayh, when he was asked this, he mentioned many good books, but he said, if I had to choose one, if there's one, it's Al-Mughni. He said, this is the greatest book of fiqh ever written. I have it myself, and I brought just one jild of it. I brought just one volume of it. And I wanted to show you these books, because you as students of knowledge should get to know these books. The print I have has Al-Mughni and Sharh Al-Kabir. We'll discuss that book together, and it's about 18 volumes. Al-Mughni, Ibn Qudama in this book, he discusses all of the different opinions of all of the madahib, even of madahib that no longer existed in his time. And he discusses to the best of his ability all of their dalail, their proofs. And he says, this is the opinion of this madhab and this is their proof. And this is the opinion of another madhab and this is their proof. And then he shows the strongest opinion with the proof in the end and clarifies the issue. And that is why some of the ulama, they said it's a mawsu'a. It's an encyclopedia of the opinions of the ulama with their dalail. And many of the ulama who didn't even follow the same madhab as Ibn Qudama would rely upon Al-Mughni to know their own madhab. We find the famous saying of Al-Izz Abdul Salam, and he wrote that, and when he heard of the book Al-Mughni, Al-Izz Abdul Salam, when he heard of the book Al-Mughni, he stopped giving fatwa. And he said, I will not give fatwa until I read this book. Even though he was a Shafi'i. But he was so impressed when he heard about it, that he stopped giving fatwa, fearing that maybe he will give fatwa, and there will be dalail, proof that Ibn Qudama has collected that he didn't know. So you look at this amazing book. Ibn Qudama wrote also in Al-Aqidah many books. One of them we are studying now, Lum'atul I'tiqad, a standard book that has been studied since his time till our time. And there are many shuruh of it. It was recommended and it was explained by Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahmatullah alayh, in a very easy to read, wonderful sharh that we will be benefiting from in this series of durus. It was also recommended and explained by Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, and we'll be benefiting from that as well during these durus and many of the other ulama of our time. He wrote Al-Qadr, discussing the very difficult issue of Qadr. He wrote Dam al-Waswas. He wrote Al-Burhan fi Mas'alat al-Quran, explaining about the Quran and how it is the kalam of Allah. He also wrote Dam al-Tawil in Aqidah, explaining why giving meanings from your own intellect to the sifat of Allah, which is called Tawil, in the science of Aqidah is forbidden. The forbiddance of the ilm al-kalam or philosophy in Aqidah. He also wrote Dam al-Kalam, talking about the ilm al-kalam. He also wrote books in al-tazkiyah, yani cleaning the heart and having a soft heart. He wrote the book Kitab al-Tawwabin, a book about tawbah and beautiful stories of the earlier ulama and the earlier salaf al-salihin and their tawbah and their repentance. A book that when you read, it softens the heart and makes a person to turn towards tawbah. And I want to stop and point this out because many of our students of knowledge today are too concerned about rudud. They just want to read to make rad, to refute people and to look down on people and to show people wrong. But they are not concerned about their own hearts and their own a'mal and their own tazkiyah and their own softening of their hearts and their own tawbah and their own astaghfar. And this is a mistake which hardens the heart and misguides the people. But if you look at Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qudama and the earlier ulama, Ibn Rajab, they were the greatest of ulama even in writing about tazkiyah, about cleansing the heart. He wrote a book called Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasideen. And this is an amazing book. There is a book which is very famous, Ihya Ulumuddin, by Al-Ghazali. Most of you sitting here have heard of it. Ihya Ulumuddin is a book by the famous Al-Ghazali, and it has many beneficial points. But as Imam al-Iraqi, the teacher of Ibn Hajar, he wrote a takhrij, a checking of it. And he wrote in his writing on it that there is no book on the face of the earth with more fabricated ahadith, more mawdu' ahadith than Ihya Ulumuddin of Al-Ghazali. It's not my word. Don't get carried away here. Al-Iraqi, Al-Hafiz Al-Iraqi, he wrote about it. So this means that there are beneficial things in it, but there were many fabricated ahadith, which would misguide the student. So Ibn Jawzi, the great scholar Ibn Jawzi, who was a teacher of Ibn Qudama, he made a mukhtasar of it. He got rid of the fabrications and the fabricated ahadith, and he kept the beneficial points, and he wrote Minhaj al-Qasideen. And Ibn Qudama, he further summarized it, taking out anything that he even felt was too weak from the da'if ahadith, and keeping what he thought to be most authentic, and he wrote a beautiful book. It's called Mukhtasar, the summarization, Minhaj al-Qasideen of Ibn Jawzi, which is a summarization of Ihya Ulumuddin, keeping what is beneficial and authentic in it. He wrote Al-Riqa wal-Buka, about softening the hearts and crying. Again, a book on tazkiyah. He wrote Al-Wasiyah, which is really his advice. He wrote Al-Mutahabbin Fillah, those that love each other for the sake of Allah. He wrote an amazing book in the ulum of hadith. You see now, he's an excellent scholar about the Quran, about the creation of the Quran and tafsir of Quran. He's a scholar in fiqh, in tazkiyah. But he was also a great scholar of hadith and the sciences of hadith. And he wrote a mukhtasar of the ilal al-hadith, of the defects in hadith. And he also wrote one of the standard books studied in usul al-fiqh till our time. In Al-Madinah and other places, this book is still being taught, Rawdat al-Nadir. Rawdat al-Nadir in usul al-fiqh, which was further summarized by a Tufi, which is called Al-Bulbul fil fiqh, or Mukhtasar Rawdat al-Nadir. An amazing book in usul al-fiqh. So you see, in all these fields, he was an amazing scholar. Ibn Qudama was born in a village called Jama'il, which is by Nablus, in Palestine, in what is occupied today. May Allah free it. And his family was known as a family of knowledgeable ulama. His first teacher was his father. He learned under his father, who was his first teacher who taught him. And by the age of 10, he had memorized the Quran. Some of the ulama said even earlier, like at the age of 7. But we know, definitely by 10, he was a hafiz of the Quran. He was from the Quran, he had memorized the Quran. And his family saw that he had a love and a yearning to learn more ilm. So after studying with the ulama of his town and his area by the age of 10, his father, they made hijrah. Just for his ilm. Just to teach him, they moved. And they went to Damascus, Sham, which was a center of knowledge at that time. At the age of 10, they went to Sham, to Damascus, to study with the ulama of Damascus. And he studied with them, and he memorized mutun. He memorized texts. the way the Salaf al-Salihin and the ulama that followed their path used to study, sitting with ulama in their halaqat, and benefiting from their akhlaq and their adab, and memorizing mutun and then reading them to the ulama, and getting the ijazat and asanid in those mutun. So he memorized Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi. Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi, one of the amazing and the well-known mutun of the Hanabila. It is the first matan in the madhab of Hanbali. And he memorized it by heart. And he went and he recited it to Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, the famous scholar, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, al-Shafi'i, thumma al-Hanbali, the one who wrote many books like Bunyat al-Talibin, who many people have made false stories about, but in reality was a great scholar of Islam. So Ibn Qudama went to him, and he went to him with his cousin. And he went with who is Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, I was listening to one of the brothers, somebody had sent me an audio, somebody who was teaching this book incorrectly said, Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi wrote, Udda Sharh al-Umda. That's a mistake. Udda is written by Bahauddin al-Maqdisi, not Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, he wrote this book, Al-Umdatul Ahkam. There is Umdatul Fiqh by Ibn Qudama. His cousin, Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, he wrote Umdatul Ahkam. He was also an amazing scholar, a great scholar. But he is not the author of Al-Udda. The author of Udda is Bahauddin al-Maqdisi. We'll talk about him in a minute. Before I go on, I want to make some points about Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, who was the companion of Ibn Qudama in his travels. He is the great scholar of Islam, Shaykh al-Hafidh Taqiyuddin. His kunya is also Taqiyuddin, like Ibn Taymiyyah, Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayh. And his kunya, his laqab is Taqiyuddin, his kunya is Abu Muhammad. His name was Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid ibn Ali, and he is also al-Maqdisi from the same family, al-Hanbali, the great muhaddith and scholar. He wrote this book, Umdat al-Ahkam. And this is one of the books we also rely upon in our durus of the Umdatain, Umdat al-Fiqh ibn Qudama and Umdat al-Ahkam of Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, he wrote this book of ahadith that have to do with ahkam, of rulings, only from the two Sahih books, Bukhari and Muslim. So Ibn Uthaymeen rahmatullah alayhi, he recommended this for the beginning student. Why? He said because there is no doubt about the authenticity of these ahadith. So when you study this book in hadith, you don't have to worry about, like in Al-Bulugh or Mishkat or other books, or At-Tirmidhi or even those books, that is this hadith sahih, is it da'if? These are all ahadith of ahkam and only from Bukhari and Muslim. And he wrote a bigger Umdat al-Ahkam, which has books from hadith from other books as well, also very beneficial books. And he also wrote a book, an amazing book in Ilm al-Rijal. It's called Al-Kamal fi Asma al-Rijal, where he collected the biographies of all of the narrators in the Sahih or Kutub al-Sitta, the 6 famous books of hadith. Now, I want to make some points for the youth. Ibn Qudama, at the age of 10, he had memorized the Quran, and at the age of 10, he traveled to seek more knowledge. How many of you sitting here are at that age or older? How many of you are dedicating your life to traveling and seeking knowledge, to memorizing Quran and memorizing mutun and memorizing ahadith? And this shows that those great ulama that we still remember and benefit from, they didn't waste their youth. Because it's your life. You can spend it in 3 different aspects or things. One, in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in gaining knowledge, in benefiting yourself. And it's your choice. Don't wait for your parents or your elders to force you. You have to make that choice. So you can spend your youth in that beneficial knowledge, and you will be from the ulama, inshallah, like Ibn Qudama, who is dead, he has passed away, and he is getting all these good deeds from us, reading his books and benefiting from him. Imagine how much reward he's getting. till today. Or you can be from those who waste their life in mubah, in those things that there is no benefit in, even if there is no sin in them. And your life will be gone, and you will have benefited nothing from it. Or, and may Allah protect us all, you can be from those who spend your time in haram. And not only will you waste your life, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable. And know that youth, when you are young, this is a time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will especially hold you accountable for. One of the 4 questions mentioned in the hadith about the people standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment is how you spent your youth. Even though your life is questioned later in the same hadith. But because the youth is something that is so often wasted, it is especially questioned about by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Qudama, he kept good company. And that's why you will see his nephews, his cousins, all his friends were pious and were people of knowledge. And that is why they benefited so much. Ibn Qudama, Muwaffaquddin Ibn Qudama writes about Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. He says about him, he was my sahib fi rahlatul ilm. He was my companion in my journeys for knowledge. And he would compete with me always in doing good. They would have competitions in not who's going to win Minecraft or in some other stupid video game. They would compete with each other in who will memorize a book of hadith first, who will finish the Quran first, who will sit in more halaqat of ilm, who will gain more knowledge, who will understand the book of Allah more, who will pray and make more adhkar. That's the good things they would compete in. And that points to a second point that I want to focus on, which is keeping good company. You look at Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, amazing scholar. You look at Muwaffaquddin Ibn Qudama, amazing scholar. Why? Because they protected each other. They were accompanied with each other. They encouraged each other. So keep good and pious friends, so you can encourage each other towards good. Al-Imam Muwaffaquddin Ibn Qudama, rahmatullah alayh, he continued to travel with Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. They traveled and they got ijazat and asanid from great scholars like Al-Hafid Ibn al-Jawzi. Ibn al-Jawzi al-Hanbali, the great scholar who wrote Tablis al-Iblis, about the tricks of shaitan, who wrote many, many famous books, who Al-Dhahabi writes about him that no scholar wrote as many books as him. Zad al-Masir, his famous tafsir, the great scholar, the one who started the madrasa that Ibn al-Qayyim became, his father was the caretaker, and that's why he's called Ibn al-Qayyim, the son of the caretaker of al-Jawziyah. Al-Jawziyah was his madrasa. So he traveled to Baghdad to study with these scholars. At the age of 20, he had finished his learning from the ulama of Damashq, and he went to Baghdad, which was another center of knowledge. And he studied from Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, Ibn al-Jawzi, Ibn Battah al-Baghdadi al-Hanbali, and other ulama of Baghdad. And then he traveled to Mecca, and he studied from the scholars of Mecca. And he traveled to Medina, and studied from the scholars of Medina. And he traveled to the Muslim lands, and studied from those ulama of those different lands. Al-Hafid Ibn Kathir, the famous Mufassir, who wrote the Tafsir Ibn Kathir, he said about him that he was the Shaykh of Islam. He was the Shaykh of the Muslimin at the time, the Shaykh of Islam, an Imam, an Alim, Al-Hafid, who was exceptionally proficient. He was exceptionally, even amongst ulama, he was exceptional. And that's why I would say that Ibn Qudama is one of the most underrated ulama of our time. One of the greatest ulama that most Muslims don't even know about. And that's why Ibn Abbas rahmatullah is saying, if you wrote the greatest book of fiqh ever written, and you go to an average student of knowledge here in our country here that we're living, and they will not know who he is. They may have heard his name, but they will not really know him. And that is our sad state of affairs. He said, we did not find, Ibn Kathir writes about him, we did not find anyone in his time or before it since the time of the Salaf. Ibn Kathir is saying about him, that since the time of the Salaf, up to his time, we did not find anybody possessing more fiqh than him. he wrote a lot of works on the madhab, يعني the Hanbali madhab, on its branches and its principles, and in the sciences of hadith, and in language, يعني in the Arabic language, in nahu, and in zuhud, and in those things that soften the hearts. And his writings in usul al-din and usul al-fiqh are of the highest quality. And his works were based upon the methodology of the muhaddithin. A very beautiful statement. Ibn Kathir is saying that his works are based on the methodology of the people of hadith. They are filled with ahadith and athar and asanid. And when he wrote, he didn't just say, it's this way. We pray this way. We do it this way. No. He would discuss the proofs and the sanad of the ahadith and the athar of the salaf, of the sahaba, the sayings and the ahadith and their authenticity and their weakness and their strength and what is stronger and weaker. And they resembled the works of Imam Ahmad and the scholars of hadith. This is the saying of Ibn Kathir about him. Imam Ibn al-Najjar described him as a thiqa, a trustworthy narrator, a noble person of high morals, of a great adl. So he was great in dhab and adl, the two things you look at in rawis, in hadith as well. An extremely generous person, known for his good character. Ibn Najjar said about him, he was extremely generous and a person famous for good akhlaq. Many students of knowledge today, they consider themselves students of knowledge, but they won't even smile at a brother when they see them. They won't even help somebody when they need help. They won't lower themselves. They're only worried about how they can brag and how they can boast and how they can try to promote themselves over others and find the faults of others. Those should go and look at the ulama of the past and how they work. He was somebody who was a dedicated abid, a great worshipper, a follower of the Salaf al-Salihin in their manhaj, in their methodology. He was an illuminating light of knowledge and piety. This is the words of Ibn Najjar, to the meaning of the translation. And he had the best of manners with people. A person would benefit from seeing him before even hearing him speak. Subhanallah. This is a deep statement. A person would benefit from seeing him before even hearing him speak. So before he would start narrating hadith or teaching fiqh, just from looking at him, from the nur that Allah gave him, from the good akhlaq that he had with people, from the way he dealt, the way he moved, people would benefit from seeing him. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, the great scholar, he wrote about him. He said, Al-Faqih, Al-Zahid, Al-Imam, Al-Shaykh al-Islam, Ahad al-Allam. He said about him, he was a faqih. He was one of the greatest scholars in fiqh. He was a zahid, a great scholar in zuhud, a great imam, a leader of the Muslims, and a shaykh of Islam, and one of the flag bearers of Islam. Ibn Salah, the great scholar of hadith, he said, مَا رَأَيْتُ مِثْلُ الشَّيْخِ الْمُوَفَّقِ الدِّينِ. Ibn Salah al-Shafi'i, the great Shafi'i scholar and scholar of hadith, he said, out of all of my teachers, of all of the scholars I saw, I never saw anyone comparable to a Shaykh Muwaffaq, يعني Ibn Qudama. There are many praises that have been mentioned about him by the ulama of Islam. But I will end here with just a few highlights about his life. When it came time for Muwaffaq ad-Din to take up the sword and defend the land of Islam against the Crusaders from Europe, he didn't just rely on his pen. He stood up and he defended the land of Islam. When it was time for him to speak the truth, he never feared speaking the truth. At-Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullah alayhi, he said about him that nobody possessed more fiqh than Muwaffaq ad-Din in Sham from the time of Al-Awza'i till his time. Al-Awza'i, the great imam who had his own mother, from that time, out of all of the great ulama of Sham, nobody had more fiqh than him. So when it came to fiqh, he was from the greatest scholars of fiqh. When it came to hadith, he wrote one of some of the most beneficial books of hadith. And he encouraged his students to be ulama as well. And I'll mention a few points, and then we'll end for today. His nephew, Baha'uddin al-Maqdisi, and he is the author of Al-Uddah, he wrote the explanation of Al-Umda. So he encouraged his own nephew to write a sharh of his own book. He didn't say, oh, that's my book. Why are you trying to explain it? You think you understand better than me? That's how people have ta'assub nowadays. They have partisanship. What? You want to explain my book? What, do you think it's not clear? No. He encouraged him. So Baha'uddin Abdul Rahman bin Ibrahim al-Maqdisi al-Hanbali, also from the same family, he wrote the book Al-Udda, the standard sharh of Muwaffaq-ud-Din ibn Qudama's book Al-Umda. And he was his own nephew. And when Ibn Qudama wrote Al-Mughni, he wrote it as a sharh of Al-Khiraqi. And Al-Khiraqi was a very old book, the first matan. But the standard to teach the Hanbali madhab in his time became Al-Mughni, Al-Muqni. Ibn Qudama's book Al-Muqni became the standard. So his other nephew, and he is Shamsuddin Abdul Rahman bin Muhammad bin Ahmad ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi al-Hanbali, also from the same family, he asked permission to rewrite his book Al-Mughni following the abwab of Al-Muqni. So the book Al-Mughni was written by Ibn Qudama, the greatest book. But it was difficult for the madaris because they were now teaching Al-Muqni as a standard text, and Al-Mughni was written to follow Al-Qiraqi. So his own nephew was given permission to rewrite his book Al-Mughni, but now following the abwab of Al-Muqni', and he did that adding some of his own fawaid, and that is called Al-Sharh Al-Kabir, the great sharh of Al-Muqni'. Al-Muqni' of Ibn Qudama became also a standard to know the madhab, and that is why Al-Mirdawi, he wrote Al-Insaf, discussing all of the opinions of the madhab based on the abwab Al-Muqni'. And one of the great scholars of our time, Dr. Abdullah bin Abdul Muhsin al-Turki, may Allah reward him, Dr. al-Turki, he put together the book Al-Muqni' of Ibn Qudama with a Sharh al-Kabir of Shamsuddin al-Maqdisi, with Al-Insaf of Al-Mirdawi in one book. And one of the brothers, may Allah reward him, he gifted it to me, I benefit from it a lot. It's 32 volumes now. So Al-Muqni' to know the standard opinion, Sharh al-Kabir to know all the dalail, and Al-Insaf to look at the differences. So we see Ibn Qudama, he also encouraged his family members and his students to become scholars themselves, and he never felt awkward if somebody used his work to write their works to benefit the ummah when there was a benefit from it. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to let us benefit from the book of this great scholar, and we should know the scholars we study from and why we study from them and what they did for the ummah. So we use this as a muqaddama, as an introduction to this dars and this series of durus. Inshallah, in the next dars, next week, we'll begin with the matan, with the muqaddama of Ibn Qudama himself. And it's a very important muqaddama because there are many beneficial points, and we want to study the aqidah correctly, in detail, in the light of the Quran and the Sahih Ahadith. So I encourage all of the brothers and sisters to be steadfast in these durus, inshaAllah ta'ala. Jazakumullah ta'ala.